Daisy.
And I'm Terri.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 264. And this week it is Terri's turn to share something. Terri, what do you have?
Well, Daisy, I have something that, of course, is a topic that we've touched on in many different ways. And I bring it back because it is in my everyday work at TFM, and I think it's in all of our lives. And so I'm going to talk about dopamine, and not from such a sciencey perspective as we might have if I had listened to another Andrew Huberman podcast or something, but a little more just in the practical ways that it affects us and then kind of what to do with it. I don't remember what one it was, but in the past, I shared something here that is from a podcast called Try This. And it's put out by the Washington Post. And it's basically a series of classes. And this topic, I think there are 4 classes. So what I'm going to share today is the first class. And then guess what? Next time when it's my turn, I will share the others. But the title of this is Your Brain on Dopamine. And the woman who hosts the podcast, her name is Christina Quinn. And in this episode, she talks to Anna Lembke, who wrote the book Dopamine Nation, which is one of those favorite books of mine. So I wanted to talk with you about it today. And they talk more specifically about devices like scrolling on your phone, your iPad, things like that. But I think as people listen, you can recognize this applies to all kinds of behaviors and substances. Just like in that book, some of the people that Anna Lembke is a psychiatrist, and some of the people that she talks about in the book, their experiences, they are behavioral addictions, and then some of them are substance addictions. So I think everyone will be able to relate to this, even if they don't have a problem with their use of their devices. So kind of going back to just a reminder for everyone, dopamine, we all call it the feel-good neurotransmitter and things, but the idea that dopamine does really kind of highlight pleasure, reward, and motivation. And the motivation is a really big one because it's a biological drive in us to get that pleasure and reward so that we keep doing something, like the rat experiment where the rats stopped moving toward their food. Even though they got pleasure when they ate the food, if they didn't have the dopamine, they didn't have the motivation. So the way Anna Lembke describes it at first is that our body makes dopamine, and so we always have kind of a base level of it, a tonic level of it. And then we do pleasurable or reinforcing behaviors, and then we get an increase above this tonic level, and then it comes back down. So there is a little bit of that teeter-totter result that I have described in various places before. So in a moment, I'm going to talk a little bit about, what happens when we become addicted to something or get really hooked on something. So specifically, as I mentioned in this episode, they're talking about devices. I think for a couple of reasons they focused on devices here. One is that it's a very common thing that you hear everyone talk about, of all socioeconomic levels, all backgrounds and things, that our reliance on devices has become, for many of us, an addictive thing, and for others, maybe problematic. Anna Lembke has a kind of hypothesis, and she says, I'll be very clear, this is just a hypothesis. But she really does believe that some of our issues around other behaviors, even for dopamine, stem from our reliance on devices.
Interesting.
One of the things that's kind of unique about devices is that dopamine is very sensitive to novelty or newness, kind of treasure seeking.
Yeah.
And that's what happens when you're scrolling Instagram or Facebook or whatever your choice is. I have found this with myself. And of course, I like to think these things don't affect me, but of course they do. I'm sorry if this is disgusting for anyone, but I too thought it was disgusting at first. This whole trend of Dr. Pimple Popper. I remember when I was a therapist, I had a client years ago talk about this, and I could not understand why she was watching it. Like, that's so gross. I don't even know, maybe 6 months ago, I opened one up and I thought, well, I want to see what this is all about.
Uh-oh.
It's insane. And it has now moved from pimple popping and blackhead removal to earwax removal. I mean, I could not have predicted this in my lifetime, that would be something that would bring some kind of reward response, but it does. And so again, going back to the novelty or newness, and it's like, well, let me see how they take care of this skin problem,
It's amazing what you can get hooked on.
Mm-hmm.
I have stopped now, but because of course this is how all these algorithms on these platforms are designed, aren't they? If they just get that whiff of, oh, she's interested in that, we'll show her some more. And then of course you're watching one and then it teases you with a bit of another. Oh God, that one looks interesting. I'll have to watch that one. I got into cow hoof trimming. I mean,
yes, that happens in our house as well. And we don't have
like
cows.
You were saying, how would you ever have imagined yourself getting into watching a farmer trim a disgusting cow hoof? The reason I thought of it is so similar, really, to that pimple. It's the same kind of, oh, that's gross, but it's really kind of, I can't stop watching it.
Again, it's newness, it's novelty.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what's going to happen? Oh, whoa, he's not going to be able to do this one for sure. Or, So one of the things that happens with dopamine and why something that's so natural and necessary for us becomes problematic is that over time, repeated exposure to that same thing, the brain adapts. And it stops releasing the dopamine in response to that rewarding behavior. So again, this, when you think of addiction, this is partly why we become addicted to something. We become almost immune to this level of it, and so we seek more.
Yeah, she talks about that whole seesaw thing, doesn't she? And did she call them gremlins or something?
I think
get on
so.
The other side. Yeah.
And then the other thing that I find really fascinating about this, and again, this is why I think why they're doing this course on dopamine, is that over time, the dopamine level, the base level, actually decreases as we develop tolerance to something.
Right.
And again, this, I think, touches back into her hypothesis. So as I'm becoming more and more addicted to this dopamine pattern, and my base level of dopamine goes lower below its normal threshold.
Yeah.
I've got depression. I've got anxiety.
That makes sense. So that's why she thinks it's affecting everything else. And of course, it's happening all the time, every day.
That's right.
Yeah.
And, think about, we have such increased diagnoses of depression, anxiety, ADD, ADHD. And, I don't think she is trying to say, yes, being on your phone too much is going to cause ADD. But it's that if it's basically suppressing your basal dopamine levels, you're going to be seeking things. You're going to be more distracted. Your brain's going to work less effectively. She refers to this as then you're in a dopamine deficit. And again, that leads to all of those feelings of lack of satisfaction, lack of fulfillment. They talk a little bit about this, and I thought this was kind of interesting too. Anna Lembke shared that, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at the base is our basic needs, our physiological needs that we need water, we need food, we need shelter. And then as we move up, things like love, connection, and at the top, self-actualization. Something she pointed out that I've never really thought about is that for much of the world's population that is not experiencing poverty and violence and things, all of those lower level needs are pretty well met. And so we're hovering up here, seeking self-actualization. How do we do that? How do we feel fulfilled? How do we feel like we have purpose? If we have to secure shelter, we know our purpose. We are very fulfilled when we attain it. So I just thought there were some interesting conversations in this episode about just kind of what leads this to be so challenging for us. She also described, again, I think people can extrapolate from devices, phones and iPads, to food, to gambling, or whatever the things are. But what happens, and they were talking about with devices, and I think we both can relate to this, that as we are seeking more and more, so we're scrolling longer, looking for the next hoof video that's going to really be pleasing, attention builds because we become aware that it's less rewarding. So we want more reward. And there's so much else we should be doing right now. Like, I haven't washed the dishes. I'm supposed to go on a run today. Oh, I have that email I need to write. But no one wants to go do the thing that's not fun. I'm going to keep trying to get that dopamine here, even though I'm aware it's less satisfying. It's getting less satisfying. And so again, this tension that builds, she really kind of describes how devices keep us hooked by seeking those dopamine surges, and in actuality, over time, leave us feeling worse. And then, unfortunately, of course, that means I need to seek more to get above this suboptimal level of basal dopamine. So she refers to this as the plenty paradox, that the idea that now many of us have unlimited access to pleasure, and that instead of making us happier and more fulfilled, it actually leaves us more anxious and less happy.
Yeah, makes sense.
So Anna Lemke talks about the idea, and I just like her. She seems very kind and very aware. And she says, look, she starts going through some examples of, I'm a parent and I've got kids to bathe and diapers to wash and this to do and work to do. And why wouldn't I be seeking as much dopamine as I can? Because life is hard. And she said, I am not here to judge anyone's seeking of this. Of course, it makes total sense. But the challenge is that life is hard. And as we become more addicted to behaviors and substances to kind of shield us a little bit from how hard life is with the dopamine response, life is actually harder. And I talk about this a lot at TFM because we talk a lot about food addiction, sugar addiction. And I often make some reference to this, that many of us have made it up in our minds that I can't get through hard times and take care of myself. And so my example is taking care of myself means not eating problematic foods. So we cave on that and we eat the comfort foods supposedly to help us get through these tougher times. And Anna Lemke,
the irony is.
Yeah. And her words just so rang true for me. It makes it harder to get through hard times when our brain is inflamed, when our gut is inflamed, when we're craving like crazy. Yes, it may make it easier for 2 minutes, but it actually makes it harder to get through the hard times. And again, going back to kind of an addiction way of thinking about it, leads to more use. I'm going to use my device more. I'm going to eat sugar more. I'm going to, gamble more often on more things. So she, kind of leading to the end of this episode and into the next, she said, we really have to then ask ourselves, is this how I want to spend my life? is this really how I want to relax? Because, of course, many of these things we're doing because it helps us relax. Like, we have all these justifications. And she encourages us to think about, is this the way you want to relax? And then this is the kicker here. And she said, and to really think about, what are the real costs to me and the people I care about? The challenge is, it's very hard to truly see these costs while we're using the substance or the behavior.
Yeah, for sure.
And so the next class in this is about taking a break for long enough to allow our brains to establish a new baseline again. In the next class, she talks about like a 30-day break. And the point being is, it takes a while for the brain to get out of that dopamine deficit place and start to respond to things differently again. So things that might have been enjoyable before haven't been lately. We need that reset. So that's going to be the next one that I come back with, of kind of what to do to try to get your dopamine reset and figure out how not to fall into this dopamine deficit. But I just thought there was so much of value in this first class for us to get to talk about.
Yeah, I think she's great. And there's a really good episode, actually, of the Diary of a CEO podcast with Stephen Bartlett, where he actually introduced it saying something like, this is the most important episode I've ever recorded, or something like that. Everybody should listen to this. And if you've listened to any of his, they're always long form. So it's a nice long episode with Anna Lemke all about dopamine. So I'll add the link to the notes with this if anyone wants some more. Because it is one of those great topics, isn't it? But yeah, I always think that's the sad truth of these quote unquote, when you're talking about food, comfort foods, that you see in groups, whether it be weight loss groups, whether it be, I've seen people talking about it in the GLP-1 arena. I used to see it in weight loss surgery groups, all of these things. People would be talking about how they were doing all the things and everything was going really well, but a relative had died or something had happened or whatever it was, lost their job, I don't know, whatever, something horrible that they had to deal with. And the way they dealt with that, their fallback, was to turn to the comfort foods. And, I've done it. I'm sure you've done it. And most of the people listening to this have done it as well. But yeah, the sad truth is, especially if you've been in a good place before, it's less of a change if you haven't. But if you've been doing all the things and have been feeling pretty good, and then you need to feel as good as you possibly can to deal with this trauma that's going on. And so, if anything, you need to up those things to make it easier to deal with. But what you do is you massively set yourself back by going back to those comfort things that really don't give you the comfort that you need. And it's it's a sad truth that I think we learn quite well, actually, when we do go from one extreme to another. It becomes more apparent, and maybe it takes quite a few times for it really to come home. But having felt really good, and then emotionally you're feeling really bad, and you turn to food and hold on a minute, I feel it, even worse. And like I say, sometimes it takes a few repetitions of that, but it does start to dawn on you, actually, this isn't a good way of dealing with it. I need to find something else, because it just makes me feel worse. And that's when you end up eating a tub of Haagen-Dazs with tears streaming down your face.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And I think, again, from a non-pathologizing perspective, to recognize I developed these strategies to cope.
Yeah, for sure.
That means I'm resilient. That means I'm creative. That's good. And now I'm really recognizing it's not fulfilling in the way that I need bigger picture. So there's no reason to shame and blame and chastise ourselves for developing these habits that were coping strategies for us, but to keep working on what are the other coping strategies that I want to develop that don't come at such a high cost.
Yeah, that's something quite profound that I learned when I was doing that therapy with the guy who worked with me with IFS, internal family systems. And that's exactly what you learn, that every negative behavior that you have comes from, it started from a place, the internal family system is talking about all these things are parts of yourself. And those parts were established as a coping mechanism, basically. Mm-hmm. And they were doing it, trying to take care of you. It was a part of you that, learned this strategy to make you feel better, to stop you feeling pain. That was the whole motivation. But then it just over time, it gets a bit out of control. And they talk about, the firefighters coming in and dousing, but just a bit out of control. But then the self-critic comes in and starts trying to control the firefighters, and it all just gets really gnarly and nasty in there. He taught me to think of everything like that as a part of myself that had good intentions. Mm-hmm. So anything that I thought of in a negative way is to stop thinking about it in a negative way, because it was coming from a place of caring. And he put depression into that as well. He said there'll be a reason your body puts you into the depressive state. It's learnt to do that, and it's doing that for a reason, be it slowing you down, making you go to sleep, whatever it is, and it's just got a bit out of control. But it was doing it from a place of compassion, from a place of love. Mm-hmm. And once you start trying to sort of hate on those parts and thinking of them negatively, like something bad that you've got to get rid of because you can't get rid of them because they're parts of yourself. So if you're thinking, I need to stop doing that, I hate that, I don't want to do that. And I got into this whole thing with before and after pictures, people hating on their before picture. I'm never going to go back to that. But you're talking about a part of yourself. And when you're being really unkind to that part of yourself is inside you crying its eyes out because you're being really mean. And that will end up, making you feel like you need to turn to the comfort foods again. And so it's all, so I've learn a lot of these things with sort of acceptance and looking at these things, trying to look at these things without judgment and trying to, think about things in a different way.
Absolutely. So next time we're going to talk about working on kind of breaking the cycle, using a reset. And I know many of us have heard people talk about this. We see that people post about this on Facebook or whatnot.
About dopamine reset, don't they?
Yeah. But I'll go into some more detail about some of the details of that Anna Lemke recommends, so that I think of it somehow like so that all of us can work on getting off of that train that just keeps us going in a direction that we're still seeking, but we know isn't getting us where we really want to be, and get on a different track that really feels more satisfying and helps us, achieve what we want to achieve, feel relief, feel the way we want to feel without the high cost of some of the methods we've been using.
Excellent. Can't wait.
Very good.
Always a popular topic, isn't it? Dopamine.
I feel like we could do a dopamine touch base every episode and people would still be thirsting for more because it's such a relevant theme for all of us.
Definitely. Well, until I see you next time, I hope you and everyone at home has a very wonderful week.
Take good care, everyone.